All right, you guys, I was living in Johnson City, Tennessee, pregnant, but not showing yet, when I walked into the Photography by JCPenney studio and I asked for an application. Y'all shoot any pictures before? This is coming out of this very tiny, sweet woman who I absolutely adored immediately. And I said, no, but I like pictures. And I like kids. And then I was really aware of how creepy that sounded together. And also how my nasally Midwestern accent sounded in front of her very sweet Southern accent. And I tried, when I lived in Tennessee, to smile every time I spoke, because every word spoken by my Tennessean friends and relatives sounded like a carnival. Because it was highs and lows and effortless melodies, and it was slow and it was inviting. And I love a Southern accent, but despite my best efforts to sound cheery in the South, I always sounded like I was just like, happy to do your taxes. Like, there was nothing ever fun and inviting in my voice in the South. But the woman looked me up and down for a moment, and right before she started to reply, the phone rang. Hang on, honey. Photography by JCPenney. This is Gloria. Can I schedule you an appointment? And it was a phrase I would often hear over the course of the next few months after I did get that job. A phrase that I would say over and over and over again with a deeply put on Southern accent. And I promise you that when I answered the phone, Photography by JCPenney, this is Crystal, can I schedule an appointment? I didn't actually intend to do that with a Southern accent, but when I heard the same sentence over and over and over and over and over again over the course of days and weeks and months, my brain must have determined that that particular phrase should be said just like that. So I would answer the phone, Photography by JCPenney, this is Crystal, can I schedule you an appointment? And the person on the other side would say, yes. And then I would say, all right, when can I get you in? And it was so utterly confusing for the poor person on the other line, and for me, and some people thought I was making fun, and other people just laughed. And I swear I was never making fun, it just happened. But I never did pick up a Southern accent in my month spent in Tennessee, just that one phrase. And the tools for portrait studio photography. It had been the entire summer working at Photography by JCPenney, so when I moved back to Traverse City in September, just a month before giving birth to my son, I walked into Sears Portrait Studio, this time ridiculously pregnant, swollen, asking for a job. And my soon-to-be boss pretended not to notice that I was very pregnant because that would be illegal. But she did ask something interesting. She said, when would you be available? And I said I was planning to take like 4 to 6 weeks off after my son was born, early October. And she seemed relieved that I acknowledged the forming human in my abdomen and said, that's perfect. We'll need people with at least some experience during the holidays. Now, I had never been a department store photographer during the holidays, just the fun summer in Tennessee. But for the next month, before giving birth to my child, I was mostly trained on equipment and the sales process for selling the photos of sleeping babies and screaming toddlers and dads that clearly didn't want to be there. So when I went away to have my baby, I felt confident that when I got back, I'm like, I got this, this is fine. And so I returned about 6 weeks later, and it was mid-November, and all hell had broken loose. It was Christmas season in a portrait photography studio. And it was right then that I had to learn the 4 unspoken categories of what it meant to be a portrait studio photographer. Kids, coupons, guilt, and making a complete ass of yourself. Unspoken. It was also during that time that I had to learn the 4 unspoken truths of a day in the life of a Sears portrait photographer. Getting brutally yelled at by terrifying mothers, crying, counting the number of times that dads and grandpas and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and even moms would roll their eyes, more crying, swallowing the deep rage that brewed inside me, and crying again. So those unspoken truths of my daily life all ended with this last sort of daydream of walking out of the studio screaming, "Your kid is an asshole, just like you. I hate you all," ripping off my light blue button-up shirt that defined me as an employee, grabbing my very see-through bag of employee materials, running bare-chested through the electronics department and saying, "Ha ha, I'm free!" And it was at this particular point in my life, though, that I can tell you with a fair amount of confidence that I did experience a lot of life things. But I swear to you, good people, you wonderful people, I swear on all that is good in the world, that there is nothing more terrifying, more life-altering and heinous than a waiting room full of sweaty families and intolerant toddlers and pissed-off parents wearing matching reindeer sweaters while looking at their watches because we were running 45 minutes behind. And we were always at least 45 minutes behind. But it wasn't because we, the humble photographers in light blue button-ups and khakis, like to torture you. It was because those of you that were waiting, you were in such a hurry to get into that studio. But the moment you got into the studio, you were not in a hurry anymore. You became so focused on building this memory in between screaming at your partners and threatening your children, you would always find a fresh new hell. This is what we found in every one of those studios. In the form of, say, a poop explosion in Studio 2. A 5-year-old who had been eating candy for a solid hour, suddenly throwing up on the angel wings worn by his sister. And the unrelenting new mom who promises that her 2-week-old newborn baby smiles all the time at home. So even though we've been trying to get this picture taken for an hour, she insists we should keep trying in Studio 3. But aside from the angry mob in matching outfits demanding holiday togetherness that would be captured under the hot studio lights, there was in fact the fact that I had just had a baby, that I was nursing said baby. Yeah, you know where this is going. And that even with my very best intentions to pump my milk-filled breasts every 4 hours, every time a baby cried in that studio, Niagara Falls shone through my light blue shirt. And I would walk in shame to the sales desk at Sears Portrait Studio, which is another aspect. The sales philosophy of Sears Portrait Studio was, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you don't buy pictures of your family, you are a garbage person. It was guilt. #1 sales tactic, guilt. Because Sears, like so many other store photo studios of their time, had a bait and switch approach, right? They would capture the moments of your children. They would entice you with mailers and coupons that boasted 99 photos for $9.99. And we would send you these things with messages of, don't let time slip away, capture the moment. And you would call because you didn't want to let time slip away. Then we would take the photos of your precious child, and the hard and fast corporate suit wearers at Sears, the hard and fast rule of this package price was that the first posed photo taken of that child that wasn't blinking or blurry or looking away was always, without a doubt, always to be the package photo. It was in the fine print even, no matter what. And that first photo, though, by design, was never a good photo. In fact, we were taught that it won't be the cutest photo. And we would let parents have a little thought that they had control over this, right? Since in the beginning of their session, we would let them choose what they wanted. Do you want a full body of your baby, or do you want like a close-up? And then we would be like, what do you want, like a cool background? Do you want any props? Any of that stuff. We would ask them these things. They felt like they had control. And then we would take that first photo, and then we had to take a mandatory 5 photographs after that. And every photo after that was more adorable than the last one. So then, armed with the 6 photos, we would walk over to the sales desk, and the conversation was a little something like this. So here's your package picture. You get 99 of these for $9.99. And here are your other photos, and you can get a sheet of these, 1 sheet, for $15 each. Oh my God, look at how cute. Oh, this is precious. You should submit this to a modeling agency. This is the next Gerber baby. I have never in my life seen anything cuter than this photo. I'm telling you the truth. And the parents would always ask, like, can't you just make this adorable picture, the third one you took, the package picture? And even though my heart would sink, we were trained. No, I'm sorry, I can't. Which was total bullshit, because we absolutely could every time. But we were told, never, ever, ever change the package picture. It was forbidden by the corporate suits. And parents, come on, you could rarely just settle on the package picture. The dream of like walking away with 99 photos for $9.99 to share with your friends and families was shattered as you saw this bewildered mom like clutching her child in one hand and a receipt for the $9.99 package with an additional 4 sheets in the other hand, and like wondering how $10 turned to 70 before you even knew it. And that was the point of this whole thing. So if you've been paying attention, we've covered 3 of the 4 steps as working as a department store photographer. Kids, they poop and they throw up on everything. Coupons, Satan himself would never have thought of a sales tactic so torturous. And guilt. Because even the parents that walked away from the sales tactics were wrought with guilt. And I gotta tell you, in full disclosure, I often broke that rule. All the time, actually. So when I would go and sit down at the sales desk with the family and I figured out that actually nobody's gonna figure this out, and they would say, oh, I don't know, I really like this one, and I would look around the room and I would be like, which one did you want? And then they would say, number 4, right there. And I would be like, never speak of this again. But of course, I spoke of it all the time, and all of a sudden I had all these requests for people, like, I'd like Crystal to take my pictures. And I was the most requested photographer, but I had the lowest sales. Nobody could figure it out. But this leaves us with the final and most disgusting step of all, the step that required making a complete ass of oneself. And despite the digital equipment, despite the perfect lighting and the automatic focus, taking a picture of a group or an adult, and especially a kid, is really friggin' hard, you guys. And so when a child wouldn't smile, we, the ones wearing khaki and light blue polo shirts, would become clowns. And we would be literally jumping up and down and squeaking toys and shaking rattles and blowing spit bubbles and snapping our fingers and rolling our tongues, making this like weird like just to get this baby's attention, guttural noises coming from grown adults. And finally the child might make eye contact with you and you'd go, oh, who's a big boy? Where's the baby? Where's the baby? There he is, it's a baby! And when none of that worked, when it had taken over the allotted 30 minutes of time and you saw the manager like lurking in the shadows and you heard the mob of people waiting outside beginning to get restless, you knew it was time to get serious. It was time to pull out the frog. And I would find the frog in his secret compartment in the prop closet. And with great deliberation, I would place that frog, made of soft cloth and filled with beans, covered in baby slobber and shame, firmly on top of my head. And I carefully approached my squishy baby target, slowly at first, so as not to startle him. "Can you blow this frog off my head?" And the child would look in utter bewilderment at the grown woman approaching him. And I would repeat, this time a little bouncier, "Can you blow this frog off my head?" And still puzzled, the child seemed to think, "Yes, I believe I can. I think I can blow that frog off your head." But I knew I had him. And so I would shout one final time with the high-pitched enthusiasm of a desperate woman. I would screech, "Can you blow this frog off my head, can you?" And suddenly, taking the bait, he would prove that he could, and he would blow the frog off my head. And I jerked backward, and the frog falling to the floor, and the child beaming at his accomplishment, just in time for me to snap the picture, melting Mom's heart, leaving Dad in tears. Victory. I worked at Sears Portrait Studio for almost 3 years before completely switching careers. And I did get a lot better at taking the photos, but it never got easier. And I learned a lot. I learned how to pose an entire family using nothing but chairs and columns and blocks and people holding each other's elbows. And I did master the art of making babies smile, but mostly I learned patience, and I learned that it's okay to break the rules when they're stupid. But regardless, sometimes I think of those far gone years. I mean, these are the years before digital cameras and selfies and at-home printers. And I hope that on a mantle somewhere is a Sears portrait of a baby that I took, sitting maybe next to a senior portrait that someone else took of that same baby. And that maybe sometimes Mom and Dad could look at those two photos and they don't think of the crying or the 45 minutes behind or the studio's attempt to guilt them into bilking and buying more photos. I like to imagine that instead they might look at those photos as bookends of their child's childhood. And maybe they'll smile thinking of the years between the two pictures and the first steps and the first words and the skinned knees and the slamming doors of teenagehood and the good memories and accomplishments and the challenging times. And maybe they'll see the laughter and the tears. And in that moment, it just warms my heart to think that in the span of just a few decades, that I played a tiny little role in capturing those moments of a parent's most treasured treasure. Thank you.